So Ruth chapter 3. And if you remember last week, we left off in chapter 3 right when he wakes up and Ruth startles him and he says, who's there? And she answers, and this is, Ruth in verse 9, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And then in verse 10, is where we left off technically, and he says, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And that's where we left off with how it was a blessing that Ruth is still looking to the embetterment and to the redemption of not just herself, but for Naomi as well. And so Boaz is recognizing that, and he's saying this is a great kindness, better than the first. It's not that you just came to this land with her and showed kindness in the beginning, but your kindness is going all the way through, all the way to the end, because you are still looking out for her and not just your own will. And then we pick it up with verse 11. And so in verse 11 is where he continues in saying, he says, you did not go after young men, whether rich or poor. And then verse 11 picks up, and now my daughter, do not fear, I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And before we go further, and I know this is only one verse in, but before we go, this is setting the stage for the rest of his rebuttal back, his answer to her, and then also his guidance. But why is verse 11 so important to set the stage for everything else that comes after? What is significant in verse 11 that we need to remember, that we need to look at and remind ourselves? Why is verse 11 important for you guys?
Is it because he refers to her as my daughter, and our kinsman redeemer refers to us as sons and daughters? Part of it can be the daughter aspect, focusing on how he is going to redeem her, and he sees her as the daughter aspect. Yes. What else for you guys, though? There's something in here. There's two things other than the daughter. There's one thing that is really important, and they're linked together. What does Boaz call Ruth? Worthy. Okay. Which is interesting. Why is it interesting that she's worthy? And I will say this before we go on. I wrote this down. Other translations will say a woman of noble character. Some will say virtuous. And some will say excellence. And then the most prominent one is worthy. But those are the other four that I've seen. Why is it important that he brings the aspect out that she's worthy? Why do you think that's important for him to declare?
Because she wouldn't be.
Because she wouldn't be? Why wouldn't she be?
She's a Moabite.
She's a Moabite, exactly. And that's what's interesting as well. Not only does he call her worthy, but who does he say also understands that she's a woman that's worthy? The town. And more importantly, this townsman, if you break it down into the literal Hebrew, it's talking about the gate. And the gate, do you guys remember what's so prominent about the gate of the town?
It's where all of the judgments were laid down, all of the disputes and everything settled at the gate. Exactly.
Yeah, the gate was kind of like the court system in a sense. All the elders would come and sit. All the prominent men of the town would be at the gate. And so he's telling her, it doesn't matter about you being a Moabite. You are worthy by your actions. I've taken notice to that. And so has my fellow townsmen. The gate and the town have all seen your noble, virtuous character. And so for him to say that, he's setting the stage for her to understand, I will not only redeem you, but just know that we are redeeming you from the aspect of you are worthy. It's not only that, you have to be in fear, you don't have to worry. We see your character rather than we see your origin. And why is that important to bring into light? Because of our here and day now. Why is it important to look at character rather than origin? What would you guys say? Go for it, Carol.
Well, God looks at us as our character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, when he made different nationalities,
Yeah.
he wants us to love one another.
Yep.
And that's the way heaven's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did you have something else, Frenchie?
Yeah, our order, we are not his chosen people, as in Israelites.
Yeah.
We are adopted into the family,
Yeah.
but all are worthy of his love. All are worthy.
Yeah.
Whether we accept that fact.
Mm-hmm.
If we choose to reject it, it's not that we're unworthy, but
Yeah.
we miss out because we didn't accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's I have this big thing on my wall at home. It's and I broke down the differences between discipline and character. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to point out with this in the aspect of being worthy and for us not focus on the origin is discipline is something that we strive for, but character is truly who we are. And character is who we exemplify. And for her, she's exemplifying a virtuous woman, a woman that's really surrendered to God, the actual God of gods. The one and only God. I said that completely wrong. So don't throw stones at me. But the one and only God. They see how she's treated Naomi. They see how they've treated the fellow workers of the field. They see that a life is truly exempling the surrendering of it to God. And so for us, we don't, as Miss Carol was pointing out, we all have different backgrounds. We all have different testimonies. We all have different walks of life. But also, we don't need to worry about that because God sees us as his children. And Frenchie said as well, we're all grafted in. So we're all made back into being united. But so he's giving her a sense of relief by reminding her that the people who it matters know that you're a virtuous woman, you're a noble woman, you're an excellent woman, you're worthy. And that's for us as well when we're evangelizing, when we're talking to people, we have to remind them it's not about you, but you're worthy because of what he has done. And that's going to be something that we see being played out here as the Redeemer taking up on his part of it all. We surrender our life to him, and then he does the rest. And that's what's beautiful about him setting this stage in verse 11. And then we even see in 12, and now it is true that I am a redeemer. So he is acknowledging he's the Goel, he is the kinsman redeemer, and he's saying that I am literally a redeemer. And then he says, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. So now what is he finishing up with here as far as we said that he's acknowledging she has nothing to fear. Everybody sees her character. But now what is verse 12 and 13 alluding to? That's kind of important in the character of Boaz, but also the continuing of the story for you guys. What's verse 12 and 13 going with? Anything for you guys?
Know that he's going to redeem her.
He's going to redeem her, yeah. But also, do you notice the character of Boaz is still coming through to honor Naomi and Ruth by not overstepping the law, by not overstepping and saying, well, there is one closer, but I'm the one that wants you, so I'm going to take you for myself. He's saying, let's still abide by the law. And he's still showing a man of noble character. And that's also, too, the worthy, I forgot to say this, but it's the same word that was used in chapter 2, verse 1, where it called Boaz a worthy man. And it's interesting there because it's talking about now they're all becoming worthy. And he is now going to redeem her, but he's in a sense virtuous by being under the law, not taking matters into his own hand. But he does reassure her once again, if he does not redeem you, if he does not fulfill what he's supposed to, I will. And so he's really stressing to her, we see who you are, we notice your character, and you will be redeemed. Whether it's through this other guy or through me, you will be redeemed. But then he says, lie down until morning. So he's telling her to stay put. Okay? And then in verse 14, so she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before anyone could recognize her. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Now, why is it important here? And you guys may or may not know this, but what's the background of why wouldn't he want her to leave in the middle of the night? Why is he saying stay here, and then before it's recognizable light for them to see her, he's saying now you can go? Why would he hold her overnight? Do you guys know by chance? Go for it.
Because he was concerned about her reputation.
He was concerned about her reputation, one. He was concerned about people seeing a foreign woman in his tent or in the threshing floor with him. Because this is where I say, you guys may or may not know it, but it's the Mishnah, and it was before the Torah. It was like the law of, it was like a study book for the law, for the Torahs and all that. In the actual Mishnah, it said that if a man laid with a Gentile woman, he could not perform a Levitical marriage with them. They would not recognize it. So if Boaz wants to be a kinsman redeemer, and all of a sudden people are seeing a foreign woman coming into his tent or leaving his tent in the middle of the night, it becomes suspicious. And it becomes what's going on there, what's happening. And so he's protecting her, and they both understand where they're at, because Ruth, I don't think we touched on this last week, but Ruth, when she said, cover me, she was proposing. And under the law of Moses, she could propose to a redeemer. A woman could. So she's proposing, and now he understands why she was in the tent. He understands her intentions are good and pure. And so that's why he's okay with saying, you can stay here because you know my intentions are pure. I know your intentions are pure. But other people do not know this. And so stay here. Don't get caught. Don't ruffle out. Don't make a bunch of noise. But stay here so that way we can do this the proper way without the gossip, without the things that might hinder us from being able to complete the Levitical law of the redeeming aspect of marriage and all of that. But this also, I want to say this for you guys as well. We need to be aware of the motives of somebody so we can make proper judgments. Once Boaz and Ruth knew that they wanted to keep things pure, they could do things properly. And from the outside looking in, it does look scandalous, right? From the outside looking in, again, as a father, I wouldn't want my daughter to stay the night somewhere, even if they were, quote unquote, being pure. I wouldn't want people to think that about them. I wouldn't want them to think things are going on. So why is it necessary for us nowadays to think about the motives, but also to keep in light what it can look like? Why would you guys say it's important to be aware of not just person-to-person motives, but the aspect of everybody from the outside seeing it? Why do you think that's important, to think about how others can perceive things?
I'm a reflection of Christ.
You're a reflection of
So
Christ.
if my behavior doesn't match that,
Yeah.
I'm not a good witness.
Yeah, true. That's very true. You are a reflection of Christ, and we want people to see Christ through us in all aspects. And then, Miss Marilyn, you had something as well?
I just remember that we were asked to not be a stumbling block.
Mm-hmm.
We might stumble someone.
Yeah, yeah.
If we do this with a bad motive, if they see us.
Yeah, yeah. It goes back to that law of liberty, right? And even though we have the law of freedom, we have the law of liberty, we're no longer under the law, so to speak, we still want to act in a righteous and noble way. And we don't want to stumble somebody. We want to show people what it means to exemplify Christ in our lives. And so we want to be careful. Now, the other side of it too, and this is a two-part because I'm going to elaborate here in a second. Did you have something, Frenchie?
Yeah, but after you say what you say.
Okay. So I was going to elaborate one last thing as well. It can kind of see like they're concealing things, right? and they're really trying to be secretive with it. And I want to throw this out there for as a thought, because we're going to elaborate it here in a little bit as well when we get a little farther down. But I want you to understand concealment is not always a lie. And I want you guys to think about that for a second, because we're going to elaborate that here in a minute. But think about that. Just because you don't tell others everything, that doesn't mean it's a lie. Okay? And so we'll elaborate that here in a second. But what you got, Frenchie?
That he was protecting her, because you back up a few verses, well, that Naomi told him, said, hey, once they've done their drinking, being merry and so forth,
Yeah.
go lie down at his feet.
Yeah.
Had he sent her away, and it doesn't tell you how late into the evening it was, that he was protecting her, because had he sent her away, wait a minute, you shouldn't be here, go, that other men that may have been
Yeah, that's true.
being married
Yeah.
and drinking may have ran across her as she was leaving, and he was protecting her, saying, stay here, because, yeah, some people can call it an early evening, and some men can stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Having a good old time.
No, yeah, that's actually a good point in the sense of, even though he calls her a worthy woman and the people of prominence understand her virtues, other people may not see her that way. And, if you are a little intoxicated, if you are a little married, and you see a woman walking around, and she's not supposed to be there, you see that she's a Moabite, you don't really, you have prejudices or whatever against her, you could take advantage of that. And that is true, that there is, he could have been protecting her from that aspect as well.
Elaborating on that further, if they had seen her leaving the threshing floor, being a Moabite in the middle of the night, and they were deep into their cups, they may have thought that she was there for different purposes, and now, maybe she's just selling herself, or maybe she's available to all, or
Yep, the integrity of her and him as well. But he definitely could have been aware of the other men and what they could have done if they saw a woman and being intoxicated themselves. So you could have done that as well. And then anything else before we continue, though? So I know we kind of sped through that a little quickly, but just making sure we're not leaving anybody too far behind or anything like that. So, okay, then continuing on. So, let it not be known, this is verse 14, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Verse 15, and he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did it fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. This is huge that I don't want us to miss over. What is the significance of these 3 verses, or 4 verses, whatever we just read? What is these symbolizing? What's going on with her coming back with all of this barley? What's the significance? Do you guys know? Any ideas? Okay, let's throw it out a little bit more finite.
So at face value,
Go for it.
He's confirming his acceptance of the proposal,
Yes.
and essentially it's a dowry sort of a payment.
Yeah, it is a dowry, 100% right, and he is accepting the proposal. But what also is significant about the 6?
Yeah.
What do you guys have any ideas what the 6 is representing?
Twice as much as completeness.
6 is 7.
7 is completeness. What did you say about the
Twice as much as what he gave her before.
twice as much as he gave her before as well?
So,
Yeah.
For her and for
Yeah.
Naomi.
Yeah. And this is where, too, before we jump into the 6, English translations don't always give the intent of the Hebrew and the Greek. So for us to understand the 6, we want to understand the latter part of verse 16 where Naomi says, how did you fare? That fare, it's not really the proper word I would choose personally. She is saying is, who are you? And it's elaborating of, did he accept it or not? Are you married or are you still single? And why is that scary for Naomi? Because if he marries just her, Naomi still has the land, but now Ruth is married off. So the important part now is where she says, he told me you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. And why he gave her 6 is because at the quote-unquote peak of Naomi's life, there was 6 people in the family. And so each measure represents a person. And so Boaz is saying, I am going to redeem your husband. I'm going to take care of you. We will raise up a son in your child's name. And so it's a symbolic also representing of I'm redeeming the entire family. Ruth is not going to leave you and just become my wife. We are redeeming your family, and then we will have children for our own after that. And so that's the symbolic of the 6 measures of the barley as well. But any questions, comments, concerns?
You're saying that the whole family, you're talking Naomi, her husband,
Mhm.
2 sons.
And the 2 wives.
And their 2 wives?
Yes. Yeah. So he's just talking about, I'm going to redeem the entire family. You don't have to worry, because in the latter sense, you talk about Naomi selling the land. And so she's doing that to get herself hopefully out of a poverty state. But the redeeming aspect is not just the land, but raising up the kids so that the family name doesn't get blotted out of Israel. And so for him, he's showing Naomi that I'm sending her back to you in fullness, that this is no longer a poverty, but also it's not just the land, it's your family's name. And so he's really showing her that I'm going to redeem the family, not just take Ruth as my wife. Because remember, she proposed, and that's the whole aspect of how did it fare with you. It's not true Hebrew idiom. In a true Hebrew language, it would say, are you his or are you mine? And so the symbolic of, we're going to redeem everybody. It's not just me that's going out. All of us are going to be redeemed. And he's really redeeming the family name, not just redeeming the individual person of Ruth. And then so you don't go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Let her know we're going to redeem the whole family. You're not mine just yet. But this is also where I want to elaborate what we said a minute ago. Where in verse 16, what does it say that Ruth told Naomi? What does it say? How much did Ruth tell Naomi? All of it. Okay? When I said concealment isn't always a lie, what I want you guys to understand from this perspective is there's going to be people that need to know information, and there's going to be people that do not need to know information. And you are going to have discernment on who needs to be aware of what. Because sometimes you can give too much information to somebody, it will overwhelm them, and it can make them, frustrated or depressed or whatever. And then there's other times where you want to tell something to somebody because that person can take everything and lift you guys up together. And that's the importance of having somebody that you can go to with all information, with all troubles, with all struggles, with all desires, and people that you will have in your life that are there to encourage, but you don't always give all of the details to. And again, it's not lying, but it's discernment on who can handle it without being overtaken by it, but also who are you doing life with every day that you can go to with every little detail. And I hope you guys have every little detail people in your life. But again, I just wanted to stress the difference of sometimes people will need to know, and other times you're hiding it from them because it's not needed. A great example of that is with the church in Savannah. I tell Savannah what she needs to know, but I don't tell her every single detail because I know it will overwhelm her. I know she can judge people. I know it can hurt her feelings. And so there's things that I deliberately do not tell her, so therefore she does not get overwhelmed, she does not get biased, and she does not get hurt. And that's me leading in a way that I know is beneficial for her. And hopefully you guys kind of understand where I'm going with that. But just so you know, just because you're concealing information, it's not necessarily a lie. But we also want to be fair and say, if you're concealing information and the hiding aspect of, your spouse is coming up to you and did you do this, and you're deliberately saying no because you know you sinned against her, yeah, that's something you probably shouldn't conceal. You probably want to reveal it to her and reconcile. But what you got, Frenchie? I think you got a Bible verse or something?
No, I was just thinking last night with, what was it? Boaz's grandmother,
Boaz's grandmother, okay?
Rahab,
Yeah,
wasn't alive.
yeah. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, yeah.
Wasn't alive, but
Yeah.
she didn't reveal information
Mm-hmm.
to the spies, not to the spies, to the people. Why?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
as from her perspective, maybe they didn't have any need to know that there were two spies there.
Yeah. we could save that for a different day because I know we differed on that viewpoint yesterday a little bit. But I can see where you're coming from. But again, the emphasis overall is, one, discern how much information you're giving to people. Be cautious of gossip. But two, emphasizing, please, please, please have somebody that you can lay it all out there. And you know it's judgmental free. You know it's encouragement. You know it's going to be love giving back, But then, so in verse 18, Naomi responds to Ruth. She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So what is Naomi emphasizing to Ruth here at the end of the chapter? Go for it.
Be patient.
Be patient. Be patient. What is done is set into motion, and it will come to pass at the proper time, in the proper manner, in the proper way, through the proper people. And that, let's be fair, is the part that we all have to work on. When it comes to patience, oh my goodness, it is so hard. And I guarantee you we could all go around the room and give an example of where we all need a little bit more patience, right? But the beauty of it is when we're dealing patiently with others, we remind ourselves that God's always being patient and long-suffering with us, right? And so we are just practicing what he's already bestowing upon us.
It's saying if God wills it, it will happen.
Yeah, that's actually true too. Yeah, you're not just exercising patience, but you could say you're exercising trust that God will bring to pass his will in his way. So, yeah, that's a good way to say it as well. But anything else? Questions, comments, concerns about chapter 3 before we go just a little bit further for you guys? Anything that, question, comments, concerns overall? No? Okay. Then we will continue trying to think. We'll go a little bit, but we won't go too far because we're already only about 10 minutes until we're done. So, verse 1 of chapter 4, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. So what's Boaz doing again? He's fulfilling his promise, his vow that he made to Ruth. I'm going to go to the gate. I'm going to wait. I'm going to look for the Redeemer who's the closer of kin than I am, and I'm going to talk with him. Okay? And so turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So the Redeemer is now here. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and he said, sit down here. So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of these sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. So now, what does Boaz start with? What's interesting that he starts with?
Property, not the people.
The property, not the people, right? It's interesting at how, sometimes the people will come up to you, or you'll go up to somebody, and you'll give them that half motive, that half truth, and it's almost like a snare to see the real motives of, are you going to do it or are you not? It's almost like a trap, if you will. And it's interesting the way we see this play out, because we'll see he's eager about the property, right? And so Boaz says, redeem it. If you don't, you're the closest, but then I come after you. And this Redeemer guy, he says, I will redeem it. Okay, I'll redeem the property. I will. Go for it. In verse 5, it says, then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate, I don't know what I just said there, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So what's interesting about this exchange? What's interesting here for you guys? There's a few different things we can elaborate here for a little bit.
If he redeems Naomi, he gets Ruth also, who now becomes a part of the family.
Yep.
She then can lay claim, quote, on his inheritance for what he's got to give her equal share of
Yep.
whatever amount of children he has.
Yep.
Doesn't state how many he has here.
Yeah.
But she would still have those rights.
Yeah.
And a little bit, from my perspective, would
Go.
say he's being a little bit selfish because I don't want to give up. I've saved all this wealth for my son or daughter, or sons and daughters, and I don't want a Moabite woman coming in and
Yeah.
taking it away.
Yeah, he is acting a little selfishly, but did you guys hear Frenchie was spot on in the sense of it's believed that he has a wife, he has sons, and they've already either split up the inheritance, or he doesn't want any children with Ruth to lay claim to the inheritance. In Numbers and in Deuteronomy, there's also laws that say you cannot treat, it's the same as the Leah aspect, and we'll get to that next week with the Leah and Rachel, where it's the law of the loved wife versus the law of the unloved wife. And it's literally spelling out that you can't treat the loved wife more than the unloved. So like you can't, if the unloved wife has a son that's older than a loved wife's son, you can't skip over him and give all the inheritance to the son of the mom who you love. And so with Ruth, if she has a son before he has a son, then Ruth's son gets all of his inheritance. And also if he excludes Ruth's children, then according to the law, he's supposed to give them a double fold. So there's a lot of legalities that if he takes on Ruth and bears a son through her, Ruth, one, becomes his wife, so you got two wives now that you have to take care of. But also the inheritance aspect behind it, he doesn't want to do it. He does not want his property to become, for lack of better terms, let's say he never has a son, but he has a son through Ruth. Now Ruth's son, his inheritance is through the dead family name, and then all of the man who redeemed him, he didn't have a son, so now his name gets blotted out from Israel because it was acquired underneath the dead family.
So I know at surface there's a reaction, or first reaction, that he's being selfish, but he's actually being a man of integrity. He's identifying, that's a price that's too high for me to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And he's being honest about that. He's
Yeah.
handing that privilege back over to
Mhm.
Boaz.
Yep.
He could have just as easily said, well, I'm gonna take the property and I can still cast
Yeah.
Ruth off the side or not honor those other commitments.
Yeah.
And in a sense, because of her Moabite heritage,
Mm-hmm.
he'd have been within a certain definition of his right to be allowed to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
people may not have been real thrilled to find out he did that,
Yeah.
but ultimately under the law, it would have been competing laws and it would have been a debate and,
Yep.
and that could have happened.
Yep. Exactly.
But instead, he was being straightforward
Yeah.
about his status, what he was willing to pay.
Mhm.
He wasn't willing to pay the price for her redemption.
Mm-hmm.
And Moab was, which is back to
Exactly.
back to the story.
Yep, and you got me. It's going back to, like he said, a lot of us, myself included, when I first look at it, is, oh, he's being selfish. And he's thinking about the inheritance. And while that is probably a good part of it, as Paul said, also we have to look at it as he's being a man of integrity and saying, that's too much for me to handle. And how often, as Paul pointed out again, Boaz is signifying who in the book? Who is he? He's Christ. And so now this other Redeemer is like, well, I can't do that. For whatever way, shape, or form, I can't do that. And now we see the symbolism of Christ saying, well, I can. And that position is reserved only for Christ. And it's awesome at how that plays in the background. And as Paul was pointing out, that's the theme of redemption, is nobody can do what only was reserved for Christ. And what's interesting, too, is going back to his name, we don't know his name because his name is not important. His name is not the theme of the story. His relationship is not important. What is important is the relationship of Ruth with Boaz, the church with Christ, not with the other people. The other people come secondary in our relationships. Our relationship and identity goes back to Christ and him fulfilling only what is reserved for him. And so that's a beautiful reminder, and thank you for pointing it out as well, because that's exactly where we were going. And again, it's not that we want to look at this man or we want to take an aspect of there's somebody before Christ, because that's not the aspect. The symbolism is a man of integrity or a man that is admitting, I cannot do that. And Christ saying, this is what I can do. This is what is for me. And then we get to see next week the beauty of the redemption behind it. And we get to look at the genealogy, and we get to look at the wedding ceremony. And there's a lot more that's going to be going on in the latter half of chapter 4. But I know we kind of skimmed through, and I will say skimmed through, that beginning part of chapter 4. Is there any other questions, comments, concerns in verses 1 through 6, as well as the rest of the study? But is there anything else, questions, comments, concerns, anything coming to your mind when it comes to verses 1 through 6 before we just end it this evening? Anything for you guys? No? Cool. So then next week, we'll get to see Boaz fulfilling the role of the redemption. We'll get to look at the role of the law of taking off the sandal and the spitting and all that good stuff. And so we have a beautiful, beautiful study next week for us to look at the redeeming aspect that is only reserved for Christ, and then how this story of redemption plays out in the lineage of the literal Christ. So we'll look at that next week as well. So Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come together this evening. We thank you for the opportunity to dive into your word. We thank you for just always reminding us that where we fall short, you can succeed. Where we were not meant to, you were made meant to. And where we don't understand, you have already the plan set in motion, and that you will not let anything pass that is not ordained for us. And so, Lord, we thank you for coming into our lives. We thank you for being our kinsman redeemer, our true kinsman redeemer. And we thank you that all can be redeemed through your name as long as we are looking for you and desiring you more than anything else. And so, Lord, we just ask that you would lead us and you would guide us and strengthen us in everything we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.